Namaskar and good evening to our respected resource person, Sir Sri Diganta Biswa Sarma, to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir Professor Ramesh Chandra Deka. I, Dr. Pooja Chhetri, on behalf of Center for, Capacity Building Center, Cotton University, welcome you all to the 18th session of today's ongoing lecture series. Before we move on towards lecture, I would like to make a small announcement here. For the smooth conduction of the lecture and also to avoid any sort of disturbance while the lecture is ongoing, we have muted all the participants today. And as Sir finishes his lecture and we move to the interactive session, we will then unmute the participant to share their views, to make comments, to provide any sort of insights. Thank you. So over to you, sir.
নমস্কাৰ আমি কনসিয়াসনেছৰ বিষয়ে আলোচনা কৰি আছো কনসিয়াসনেছ চেতনা চৈতন্য চিত বিভিন্ন শব্দৰে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত বুজোৱা হয় আৰু আমি ইয়াত যিবোৰ কনসিয়াসনেছ উই ক্যানট সি উই ক্যানট টাচ কনসিয়াসনেছক আমি স্পৰ্শ কৰিব নোৱাৰো আমি শক্তি যেনেকৈ আমি দেখা পাব নোৱাৰো কনসিয়াসনেছ আমি দেখা নাপাওঁ আমি তাৰ ৰিএকচনটো আমি কেতিয়াবা ফিল কৰো আৰু ইয়াত যিবোৰ কথা কোৱা হৈছে যদি একেবাৰে প্ৰ্যাকটিক্যাল উদাহৰণ যদি লাগে মই আপোনালোক সকলোকে এখন কিতাপ সেইখন কিতাপ প্ৰায় ভাৰতীয় প্ৰায় প্ৰতিটো ভাষাত পোৱা যায় এমাজনতো পাব অটোবায়োগ্ৰাফি অফ এ যোগী পৰমহংস যোগানন্দ আমাৰ অসমতো আমাৰ অঞ্জন শৰ্মা তেখেতে অনুবাদ কৰিছে সেইখন আৰু প্ৰায় ভাৰতীয় প্ৰায় ভাষাতেই তাৰ আপুনি পাব সেই কিতাপখন যেতিয়া আপুনি পঢ়িব আমি ইয়াত কথা কোৱা কথাবোৰৰ লগত আপুনি ৰিলেট কৰিব পাৰিব তেখেতৰ বিষয়েও জানিব পাৰিব আৰু কেনেকৈ হাউ কনসিয়াসনেছ ফৰগেটিং ইটসেলফ and become object material object how it becomes energy how it becomes atom মানে তাৰ কিছুমান আপুনি একেবাৰে ভিভিড একেবাৰে জীৱন্ত আপোনালোকে কাহিনী দেখা পাব আৰু অতি ৰোমাঞ্চিতও হ'ব আৰু এইখন সঁচা কাহিনী একেবাৰে কিন্তু যদি একেবাৰে যি সকল সংখ্যই আছে মই তেওঁলোকৰ কথা নকওঁ গতিকে আপোনালোক সকলোৱে যদি পাৰে সেইখন কিতাপ আপোনালোকে কিনি ল'ব যি ভাষাতেই বিচাৰে প্ৰায় অলমোস্ট সেই ভাষাতেই পাব an autobiography by a yogi পৰমহংস যোগানন্দ আপোনালোকে কিতাপখন পঢ়িব গতিকে আমি কনসিয়াসনেছৰ বিষয়ে আলোচনা কৰিছিলো ইতিমধ্যে আমি চাৰিটা এসপেক্ট আমি আলোচনা কৰিছো কনসিয়াসনেছৰ যে কনসিয়াসনেছ a fundamental thing in existence আমি সেইটো বিষয় ইতিমধ্যে আলোচনা কৰিছো তাৰ পিছত আলোচনা কৰিছো কনসিয়াসনেছ a reality inherent in existence কনসিয়াসনেছ অটোমেটিক নহয় কনসিয়াসনেছ is a reality inherent in existence শাশ্বত আমি যেটো ইটারনাল বুলি কওঁ শাশ্বত তাৰ আদি নাই অনাদি তাৰ আদি নাই অন্ত নাই a reality inherent in existence আৰু আমি এই এসপেক্টৰ বিষয়ে আমি আজি পুনৰ অলপমান আকো আহিম তাৰ পিছত আমি আলোচনা কৰিছিলো কনসিয়াসনেছ not only as power of awareness আমি সাধাৰণতে কনসিয়াসনেছ মানে কি বুজো consciousness is nothing but awareness but it is not only awareness it is power of awareness plus power consciousness is a power consciousness is not only awareness consciousness is also power so consciousness is power of awareness then it is not only power of awareness then what it is a dynamic energy not only dynamic energy it's a creative energy or it can be said in other words also that consciousness has dynamic and creative energy either you can say consciousness is itself a dynamic and creative energy or you can say consciousness has dynamic and creative energy so this aspect also we did discuss then we discussed consciousness usually identified with mind is definitely a consciousness but mind is Mind is not the only range, and mind cannot exhaust all the ranges of consciousness, because below mind, above mind, behind mind, there are other ranges or planes of consciousness. Other ranges or planes of consciousness. So we did discuss, and today we will be discussing another 3 to 4 aspects of consciousness. আমি আগেই কৈছো যে কনসিয়াসনেসক একেবারে সূত্রবদ্ধ কৰি একেবারে সাইন্টিফিক একদম তাক ক্যাটালগ হিচাপে আমি তাক কোৱাটো সম্ভৱ নহয়। আমি তাৰ ডিফারেন্ট এসপেক্ট we have to experience, we have to realize, আৰু সেইভাবে মই কৈছো প্র্যাকটিক্যালি আপোনালোকে এই যিখন এই অটোবায়োগ্রাফি অফ এ যোগী সেইখন আপোনালোকে পাৰিলে সংগ্ৰহ কৰি ল'ব। এতিয়া আলোচনা আমি কৰিবলৈ বিচাৰিছো যে কনসিয়াসনেস ইজ ইট ডিপেন্ডেন্ট অন দি ৰিয়েকশনস অফ পার্সোনালিটি, যে এটা ব্যক্তিত্বৰ প্ৰয়োজন হয় নেকি, যে পার্সোনালিটি অর্থাৎ only an individual can give reaction of consciousness, can react consciously. Is it dependent on the reactions of personality? আমি সেই বিষয়টো আলোচনা কৰিব বিচাৰিছো। আৰু মহাৰিষে কৈছে no, consciousness is not, to my experience. Why it is to his experience? All subjective aspect of our life has to be experienced. The laboratory is within us, and laboratory, we all must have our own laboratory of experience. বিজ্ঞানৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত, পদাৰ্থ বিজ্ঞানৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত, ৰসায়ন বিজ্ঞানৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যেনেকে এটা লেবৰেটৰীতেই 1 লাখ মানুহে আহি তাতে টেষ্ট কৰিব পাৰে, কিন্তু সাবজেক্টিভ সায়েন্সৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতো একেই বিজ্ঞানৰ দৰে একেই ধৰণৰ মই পিছত মই কেতিয়াবা সময় পালে মই কম, মহাৰিকে কোৱা কথা একেই ধৰণৰ সকলোবোৰ পদ্ধতি যোগৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত, সাইকোলজিৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত ব্যৱহাৰ কৰা হয়, কিন্তু তাত পাৰ্থক্যটো কি, প্ৰত্যেকৰে ক্ষেত্ৰত লেবৰেটৰীটো পৃথক পৃথক। পৃথিৱীৰ 7.5 কোটি মানুহৰ কাৰণে we need 7.5 কোটি laboratories. One laboratory will not suffice. Difference to কিমানেই। গতিকে সেইকাৰণে মহাৰিষিয়ে যিমানবোৰ ইয়াত যে কথা কৈছে তেওঁৰ এইবোৰ ইন্টেলেকচুৱেল থেসিস নহয়। মহাৰিষিৰ শ্ৰী অৰবিন্দ, whether you can believe in him or you may not believe in him, that's up to you. কিন্তু মহাৰিষিয়ে যিবোৰ কথা কৈছে, যিবোৰ এক্সপেৰিয়েন্স কৰিছে, সেইকাৰণে এখন মহাৰিষিৰ এখন বায়োগ্ৰাফি আছে, সৎপ্ৰেম, এইটো ভাৰতীয় নাম, কিন্তু অৰিজিনেলি হি ইজ এ ফ্ৰেঞ্চ নেশ্যনেল। তেওঁৰ এখন বায়োগ্ৰাফি অন শ্ৰী অৰবিন্দ আছে, টাইটেল শ্ৰী অৰবিন্দ অৰ এডভেঞ্চাৰ অফ কনসিয়াসনেস। শ্ৰী অৰবিন্দ অৰ এডভেঞ্চাৰ অফ কনসিয়াসনেস। গতিকে মহাৰিষিয়ে যিমানবোৰ কথা কৈছে, তেওঁৰ লাইফ ডিভাইন সিনথেসিস অফ যোগ, ইভিন তেওঁ সোশিয়োলজিক্যাল ইত্যাদি কথাটো তেওঁ যিটো হায়াৰ প্লেনত নিজে তেওঁ এক্সপেৰিয়েন্স কৰিছে, তেওঁ অন্তৰ্দৃষ্টিৰে যিটো দেখা পাইছে সেইটো কথাহে কৈছে। আপুনি সেইটো বিশ্বাস কৰিব পাৰে, নকৰিব পাৰে, দ্যাটস আপ টু ইয়োৰ উইজডম। সেইভাবে কৈছে তেওঁ কনসিয়াসনেস ইজ নট, টু মাই এক্সপেৰিয়েন্স, টু হিজ এক্সপেৰিয়েন্স, এ ফেনোমেনন dependent on the reactions of personality. Reactions of personality. Reactions of personality to what? To the forces of nature. To the forces of nature, because there is force in nature. There is force behind nature. And when force acts, our consciousness reacts. But according to Maharishi, this reaction does not necessarily depend on our personality. Why? And also he says consciousness is not amounting to no more than a seeing or interpretation of this reaction. So he has said here 2 things, that consciousness not a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality to the forces of nature, as well as consciousness is not a phenomenon amounting to seeing or interpretation of these reactions. Then, so consciousness is not a phenomenon dependent on reaction anyway. কিন্তু যদি ৰিয়েকশ্যন পাৰ্চনেলিটিৰ ওপৰত ডিপেণ্ডেণ্ট হ'লহেঁতেন, যদি হ'লহেঁতেন, আমি এতিয়া অলপ বিপৰীত ফালৰ পৰা কথাটো চাওঁ। কৈছে if that were so, if that were so, that is to say, if consciousness dependent on the reactions of personality, then what would happen? কৈছে if that were so, then when the personality becomes silent and immobile and gives no reaction, there would therefore be no consciousness. আমি সেই বুলি ক'ব লাগিলহেঁতেন যেতিয়া পাৰ্চনেলিটি চাইলেণ্ট থাকে, ইনএক্টিভ থাকে, ইমমোবাইল থাকে। Why? What is the logic? As there would be no seeing or interpretative action. When personality becomes silent, what does it mean? It means there is no seeing or interpretative action. When personality is immobile or giving no reaction, what does it mean? It means simply no seeing or interpretative action. গতিকে যদি consciousness would have been a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality, then when personality becomes silent and immobile and gives no reaction, there would therefore be no consciousness. And what is the rationale? The rationale is as there would be no seeing or interpretative action. তেনেহ'লে শুই থাকোঁতে আমাৰ কনচিয়াছনেছ নাথাকে নেকি? আমি শুই থকাৰ সময়ত ইভিন আনকি যেতিয়া আমি টেম্পোৰাৰিলি আমি যেতিয়া অজ্ঞান হওঁ বা আমি যিটো মূৰ্ছা যোৱা বুলি কওঁ, তেতিয়াও কি আমাৰ চেতনা নাথাকে নেকি? কাৰণ তেতিয়াতো দেয়াৰ ইজ নো চিয়িং, দেয়াৰ ইজ নো ইণ্টাৰপ্ৰিটেটিভ একশ্যন, ইটছ মোবাইল, ইটছ ইনএক্টিভ, বাট ষ্টিল কনচিয়াছনেছ ইজ উইদিন আছ, বিকজ কনচিয়াছনেছ এ ৰিয়েলিটি ইনহাৰেণ্ট ইন দি এক্সিষ্টেঞ্চ। Then Maharishi gives one concrete example. আৰু সেইবাবেই মই আপোনালোকক এই কিতাপখন পঢ়িবলৈ দিছো। এই কিতাপখনত তাত ভিভিড ডেছক্ৰিপশ্যন পাব আপোনালোকে, সেইবাবেই পঢ়িব দিছো। কিয়? মহাৰিষিয়ে লিখিছিল যদি এইটো হ'লহেঁতেন যে যেতিয়া when personality becomes silent, personality becomes immobile, giving no reaction, and therefore there is no consciousness as there is no seeing or interpretative action. কৈছে it is not true. কিয়? কৈছে যদি এইটো সঁচা হ'লহেঁতেন, that contradicts some of the fundamental experiences of yoga. Fundamental experiences of yoga. Because yoga is not about, yoga has no relation to therapeutic science. Yoga is not a therapeutic science. Yoga is adventure of consciousness. Asana and pranayama are themselves not yoga. They are only means to yoga. There are other means too. It is not indispensable that to be a yogi, you have to have asana and pranayama as your means. There are other means too. When we shall be dealing with yoga psychology, physiopsychology of yoga, all these things will be taken up. So that contradicts some of the fundamental experiences of yoga. And what is that fundamental experiences? A silent and immobile consciousness. Silent and immobile consciousness. That is to say, personality becomes silent and immobile and giving no reaction. That is to say, a silent and immobile consciousness. Infinitely spread out. একেবাৰে পৰিব্যাপ্ত হৈ আছে, প্ৰসাৰিত হৈ আছে, ইনফাইনেটলি। এনে স্প্ৰেড আউট মানে তো লাৰ্জ এটা এৰিয়াত প্ৰসাৰিত হোৱাৰ কথা বুজোৱা হয়, কিন্তু ইয়াত কৈছে ইনফাইনাইটলি স্প্ৰেড আউট। আৰু সেই কিতাপখনত আপুনি কেনেকৈ ইনফাইনাইটলি কনচিয়াছনেছ উইদাউট অৰ্গান, উইদাউট ফিজিকেল বডি, উইদাউট দি এক্সিষ্টেঞ্চ অফ পাৰ্চনেলিটি, how consciousness works, আপোনালোকে তাৰ একেবাৰে বৰ্ণনা পাব। কৈছে a silent and immobile consciousness infinitely spread out, not dependent on the personality, impersonal and universal. Not only that, In that state of consciousness, not seeing or interpreting context, but motionlessly self-aware. This is the yogic experience. Motionlessly self-aware. There is no seeing or interpreting context. That is to say, you are not reacting to outward things, external things. It is motionless. There is no seeing or interpreting action. Still, it is self-aware. That is to say, still it is conscious. Consciousness is still active. But not dependent on the personality, but impersonal and universal. Not dependent on the reactions, but persistent in itself, even when no reactions take place. There is no reaction, motionlessly self-aware, inactive, immobile, motionless, giving no reaction. Still, it is self-aware. Still, it is conscious. You will have tremendous, many examples. You will be fascinated. You will be আপোনালোক ৰোমাঞ্চিত হ'ব কিতাপখন পঢ়িলে। তেনেহ'লে আমি যদি কওঁ আমাৰ যিটো সাবজেক্টিভ পাৰ্চনেলিটি আছে, যেটো সাবজেক্টিভ পাৰ্চনেলিটি, হোৱাট ডাজ ইট মিন? সাবজেক্টিভ পাৰ্চনেলিটি মিনছ আমি যদি আমাৰ সম্পূৰ্ণ আমাৰ বডিৰ পৰা যদি আমি কেৱল মাত্ৰ আমাৰ শৰীৰ সত্তাটোক আমি যদি অলপ সময়ৰ কাৰণে এক্সক্লুড কৰো, still we are existing. কাৰণ body is not the only element we are composed of. There are other elements too. So minus body, the existence, your existence is nothing but your subjective personality. Your subjective personality. If you can imagine that you can exist without a body, for even because when body is sleeping, still we are aware. So the subjective personality itself is only a formation of consciousness. And subjective personality means personality minus body. That is to say, not dependent on body. That is our subjective personality. When I say I exist, does it mean my body is existing? Yes, body is also, but apart from body, গতিকে মোৰ অকল শৰীৰটোৱেই নহয়, গতিকে মোৰ এটা সাবজেক্টিভ এটা এক্সিষ্টেন্স মোৰ আছে, সাবজেক্টিভ পাৰ্চনেলিটিও আছে। যেতিয়া মোক আপুনি ক'ব যে এই মানুহজন বেয়া, এইজন মানুহ ভাল, এইজন মানুহ বেয়া, এইজন মানুহ ভাল, এইজন মানুহ খুব তেওঁৰ ঈৰ্ষা বৃত্তি আছে, these are all part of my subjective personality, not related to my body. There is no relation to my objectivity. So the subjective personality itself is a formation of consciousness. And what does it mean? That means consciousness does not depend on personality. Consciousness is inherent in the reality, a reality inherent in the existence, not a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality. Then this subjective personality is nothing but a power inherent. This subjective personality, which is formed by consciousness, is a power inherent. Mur bhitorat thaka eta power. But power not in the activity of the temporary manifested personality. Ei jitu mur external personality ase, mon pran shoriror majot thaka shakti nohoy koise, but in the being, in the self, or in the purusha. What is self, what is purusha? Ami alochona korim je the psychological parts, apart from your mind, apart from your vital, apart from your body. The other parts, there are other parts too. When we shall be taking up the parts of being, who is called being, who is self, spirit, psychic being, soul, mind, life, purusha. all these things will be taken up. So this is a power inherent not in the activity of the temporary manifested personality, but in the being, the self or Purusha. So subjective personality, our subjective personality is formed itself by consciousness, and this subjective personality is a power inherent, but power in our Purusha, in our self, not in our, not, not in the activity of the temporary manifested personality. So points to be noted then points to be noted that consciousness, not a phenomenon dependent on two things. What are those two things? Number one, on the reactions of personality to the forces of nature. And not a phenomenon amounting to seeing or interpretation of these reactions. First point to be noted. Second point, if dependent, if it were so, if that were so, the phenomenon dependent on consciousness, then what would have happened? There would be no consciousness. There would be no consciousness when personality becomes silent, immobile, and gives no reaction. Why? As there would be no seeing or interpretative action. But in reality, it is not happening. And that is why consciousness is not a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality to the forces of nature. Consciousness is not a phenomenon amounting to seeing or interpretation of these reactions. Because in reality, what we see in yogic experience, as told by Maharishi, but then it would be a contradiction of some of the experiences of yoga. That is to say, as for example, silent and immobile consciousness infinitely spread out. The personality is silent, immobile. Still consciousness infinitely spread out. একেবারে অনন্তভাবে অসীমভাবে প্রসারিত হৈ আছে, অসীমভাবে প্রসারিত হৈ আছে. Not dependent on your body, not dependent on your mind. এই কথাবোৰ এইভাবে কোৱা হৈছে that consciousness is the fundamental substance of this existence. Consciousness is a fundamental thing. It's independent, not dependent on anything. So not dependent on personality, but on impersonal and universal. Rather, consciousness dependent on impersonal and universal. And not seeing, so the contradiction of some of the yogic experience, and yogic experience in silent and immobile consciousness infinitely spread out. That is to say, not dependent on personality, but on impersonal and universal, and not seeing and interpreting context, but motionlessly self-aware. This is the meaning of consciousness becoming silent and immobile, but infinitely spread out. Infinitely spread out. So let us recap one of the aspects which we discussed in one of the previous sessions, that consciousness a reality inherent in existence. In order to understand this aspect, I am recapping this one again. So that consciousness is a reality inherent in existence. This has already been discussed. A reality inherent in existence. It is there. What does it mean? It is there even when it is not active. It is being explained. It is there even when it is not active on the surface, but silent and immobile. It is there even when it is invisible on the surface, not reacting on outward things or sensible to them, but withdrawn and either active or inactive within. Either maybe active or inactive within, but withdrawn from the external nature. So it is there even when it seems to us to be quite absent. যেটি আমাক একেবারে কনসিয়াসনেস নাই যেন লাগে, তেতিয়াও কিন্তু কৈছে যে কনচিয়াছনেছ থাকে এণ্ড দি বিইং টু আৱাৰ ভিউ আনকনচিয়াছ এণ্ড ইনএনিমেট যেতিয়া সত্তাটোক আমাৰ কি লাগে যে এণ্ড দি বিইং seems to be unconscious and inanimate অৰ্থাৎ জীৱন্ত যেন নালাগে আৰু অচেতন যেন লাগে to our view তেতিয়াও কি হয় কৈছে it is there consciousness is there even when it seems to us to be quite absent even when it is there even when it seems the being unconscious and inanimate to our view it is still there. So now I think it is more clearer. So, but withdrawn that not reacting on outward things and sensible to them. The meaning of immobility, immobile consciousness, inactive consciousness, meaning not reacting on outward things or sensible to them. It is not visible on the surface. So that is why it is said that consciousness is not a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality. And the fundamental experiences of yoga, if you can go through the books, then you will yourself experiencing some great things. So then the next aspect, এবাৰ কোনোবা হয়তো জনৈক শিষ্যই লিখিছিল যে কনচিয়াছনেছ কি তাৰ এলিমেণ্টবিলাক একেবাৰে কেটলগ টাইপত তেওঁক বুজাই দিব লাগে এটাৰ পিছত এটা তেতিয়া মহাৰিষি উত্তৰ দিছিল আচলতে এই যিবোৰ মই এইখিনি টেক্সট কিছুমান তেওঁৰ লাইভ ডিভাইনৰ পৰা কৈছো মই পিছত এইবোৰ আপোনালোকৰ লগত শ্বেয়াৰ কৰিম সময়ত আপোনালোকে নিশ্চিন্ত থাকিব মই এতিয়ালৈকে যিমানবোৰ কোট কৈছো গোটেইবোৰেই মই ফ্ৰম টাইম টু টাইম লাহে ধীৰে মই শ্বেয়াৰ কৰি থাকিম যেনেকৈ আগতে কিছু কৰিছো তাৰ পিছৰখিনিও কৰিম তাৰ পিছৰখিনিও মই কৰিম তেতিয়া মহাৰিষি এনসাৰ দিছিল মই যিটো মহাৰিষিৰ লেটাৰ্ছ অফ যোগা বুলি 4টা ভলিউম আছে ভলিউম নম্বৰ 28 29 30 and 31 তাত বিভিন্ন শিষ্যই তেওঁ কাৰণ তেওঁ বছৰত শিষ্যসকলৰ লগত মাত্ৰ 4 দিন দেখা দিছিল দৰ্শন দে বুলি কৈছিল বাকি সময়ত শিষ্যবিলাকে সাধনাত যেতিয়া কিবা ডিফিকাল্টি পাই বিভিন্ন প্ৰশ্ন লিখিছিল আৰু তেওঁ প্ৰত্যেকখন প্ৰশ্নৰ উত্তৰ দিছিল আৰু সেইবোৰ আশ্ৰমাইতসকলে সংৰক্ষণ কৰিছিল আৰু তাৰে পিছত গৈ আৰু খুব সিস্টেমেটিক্যালি এই ভলিউমবোৰ সম্পাদিত হৈছে তাত সাবজেক্ট ওয়াইজ বস্তুবোৰ আছে আৰু তাত বস্তুবোৰ বুজিবলৈ বেছি সহজ মেইন টেক্সটত কৈও কৈছে you seem to want to reduce everything to a catalog and a scientific analysis একেবাৰে পদাৰ্থ বিজ্ঞান ৰসায়ন বিজ্ঞানত অবজেক্টিভ এসপেক্টৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যি ধৰণে আমি কৰো ঠিক সেই ধৰণে যেন যিজন প্ৰশ্ন কৰোতাজনে বিচাৰিছে তেতিয়া মহাৰিষি এনসাৰ দিছে but nobody has ever been able nobody কৈছে কোনেও এতিয়ালৈকে পাৰা নাই কৈছে nobody has ever been able to do that with the working of the consciousness কেনেকৈ কাম কৰে একেবাৰে সাইন্টিফিক এনালাইসিসৰ দৰে তাক কাৰণ it is a personal experience you have to experience yourself আমি সেইভাবে মই কৈছো we are discussing different aspects of consciousness and we are trying to understand what is consciousness but fundamentally it is a matter to be experienced to be realized to be experienced not to be intellectually understood because the element of a condition of consciousness cannot be classified the elements of a condition even condition of consciousness cannot be classified like the element of matter this is Maharishi's opinion and it is not his intellectual opinion all his opinions are nothing but his personal experiences that is to say his adventure of consciousness what he saw through his consciousness আমি সেই বিষয়ে আৰু এটা পৰৱৰ্তী সময়ত আমি আলোচনা কৰিম যেতিয়া যে কনসিয়াসনেছৰ বিষয়ে আৰু আমি কিছু ৰিভিলিং কথা জানি থাকিম যে কনসিয়াসনেছ আমাৰ অৰ্গান পপুলাৰ সায়েন্সে কোৱা যিবোৰ কথা পপুলাৰ সায়েন্টিফিক সাইকোলজিয়ে কোৱা কথাৰ লগত কিমান তাৰ পাৰ্থক্য আছে কিমান সিমিলাৰিটি আছে আমি জানি থাকিম গতিকে কৈছে the elements of a condition of consciousness cannot be classified like the elements of matter so this is the second aspect we have discussed today Then the third aspect, the ordinary view of consciousness. Ordinary view of consciousness. What is our ordinary view? An ordinary view is actually it is Western view, European view of European scientific world, ordinary view, because we are moved by the Western scientific views only. আমি যিসকল ভাৰতীয় মানুহে আমি বহু ক্ষেত্ৰত ভাৰতীয় বুলি দাবী কৰা বহু ধাৰণা আচলতে পশ্চিমৰ ধাৰণা আমি নাজানোই কাৰণ আমি প্ৰকৃত ভাৰতীয় জ্ঞান পৰম্পৰাৰ লগত নলেজ সিস্টেমৰ লগত নলেজ ট্ৰেডিশনৰ লগত দেয়াৰ ইজ ৰেডিকেল ডিফাৰেন্স ৰেডিকেল ফান্ডামেন্টাল ডিফাৰেন্স আমি সেই বস্তুবোৰ নাজানো কাৰণে গতিকে this is the Western view, Western scientific view. This so-called ordinary view of consciousness, it is the scientific view. So the ordinary view of consciousness is based on normal superficial experience plus science. First point to be noted. Superficial experience. And that is to say consciousness is awareness. Consciousness becoming energy, consciousness becoming material object. All these things are not part of ordinary view of consciousness. So the ordinary view of consciousness is based on normal superficial experience, jitu ekebare bajjo uporua jitu amar ami chetona buli kole manhor chetona nai chetona buli kole ji buju plus kisu porimane bigyan. For physical science, তেনেহলে এই ভৌতিক বিজ্ঞানৰ বাবে পদাৰ্থ বিজ্ঞানৰ বাবে what is consciousness? Because for physical science, consciousness is a temporary phenomenon. Temporary phenomenon. It is not a reality inherent in the existence. It is not a fundamental thing existing eternally. It is not existing eternally. So according to physical science, consciousness is a temporary phenomenon. But according to Indian yogic science or according to the experiences of Indian rishis, consciousness is a fundamental thing in universe, in the existence, a reality inherent in existence eternally. As against this concept, Western physical science, consciousness is a temporary phenomenon, not eternal phenomenon. কোনো শাশ্বত চৈতন্য শাশ্বত নহয় বৰং যেটো টেম্পোৰেল বুলি যেটো আমি কওঁ temporal. It's a temporary phenomenon quote in an unconscious world. আমি ইয়াৰ পিছতে যেটো আলোচনা কৰিম ইউনিভাৰ্সাল কনসিয়াসনেছৰ ওপৰত আমি so another difference between scientific view and Indian spiritual position. Indian spirituality says this world is not unconscious. There is a consciousness behind this world, but science does not agree to. And that is why Maharishi says science view is very superficial experience. It's not a deeper experience, superficial experience. So for physical science, consciousness is a temporary phenomenon in an unconscious world. This is the fundamental difference between science and spirituality. Whether you may disagree with spiritual views, but this is the fundamental difference between science and spirituality. Spirituality considers or envisages a eternal consciousness behind this apparently unconscious world. Energy is consciousness. Energy has consciousness. Rather, it's dynamic consciousness. It's creative energy. But science does not agree to this fact because science view is very much superficial experience. So for physical science, consciousness is a temporary phenomenon in an unconscious world. Then consciousness korpura ahil. Science does not know. And science does not want to know. That is the irony. Science does not want to know. where from consciousness springs. Consciousness, or what is the source, what is the spring of consciousness? Science does not want to analyze, science does not want to find out. Because to study consciousness is not part of physics. Because physics is concerned with objectivity of the world. Physics is not concerned with subjective phenomenon. They does not recognize subjective truth. So, what is scientific position? Something evolved. Something evolved in an animate organization. Animate organization means we are. Ami animate, ami jibanto. Amar eta jibanto hottat. Something evolved. Kenake evolved hoise? We do not know. And we do not want to know. We mean science do not want to know, science does not want to know, and science does not know. Because why? Science says it is not part of their investigation. And that somehow develops, consciousness somehow develops in an originally inanimate and unconscious matter. According to, but Bigyane, Adhyatma Bigyane, Vedantoi, at least eta uttor dise. Je prothamote there is involution, then evolution. Because nothing can be evolved out of nothing. Aru keibabe Darwinor jitu evolutionary theory, Darwinor evolutionary theory to matteror pisot kio plant ahil, Darwine koa nai. কৰ পৰা আহিল, কেনেকে আহিল, সেইভাবে মহাৰিষিয়ে প্ৰথমতে আমি এদিন পঢ়িছিলো, তেওঁৰ লাইফ ডিভাইনৰ ভেৰি ফাৰ্ষ্ট চেপ্টাৰতে লিখিছে। তেওঁৰ প্ৰথম চেপ্টাৰতে মহাৰিষিয়ে লিখিছে, ইন এ কাইণ্ড অফ ৱে ৰিজেক্টিং ডাৰউইনছ থিয়ৰী, কৈছে ইট ইজ এ জাষ্ট ষ্টেটমেণ্ট অফ ফেক্ট বুলি কৈছে, ইটছ নট এক্সপ্লেনেশ্যন। কৈছে উই স্পীক অফ দি ইভলিউশ্যন অফ লাইফ ইন মেটাৰ, দি ইভলিউশ্যন অফ মাইণ্ড ইন মেটাৰ. But evolution is a word which merely states the phenomenon without explaining it. Evolution in modern world, the evolution as explained by Darwin, evolution is mere a word. Is a word which merely states the phenomenon without explaining it. For why? Why? For there seems to be no reason why life should evolve out of material elements or mind out of living form unless we accept the Vedantic solution. Science has not given any solution. Darwin has not given any solution. Whether you agree to Vedantic solution or not, it's up to your intellect. It's up to your modern intellect. But at least Vedanta has given a solution. Vedanta has given a solution, which we did discuss in the very first definition of our consciousness. The process of involution, so descent, therefore ascent. Involution, therefore evolution. So, unless we accept the Vedantic solution that life is already involved in matter, as consciousness forgetting itself in form, that is to say in matter, and becoming material object, becoming electron, becoming atom, becoming material object, involution. So, and unless we accept the Vedantic solution that life is already involved in matter and mind in life, because in essence, matter is a form of veiled life. Matter ki asalote tar majot jiban abrito hoi ase. Evolution is the anabrito kora. And life a form of veiled consciousness. Ami Maharishi prothomote nijor life divinot koise, we have to accept Vedantic solution. Because without this solution, there is no explanation anywhere in the world. Kyo কিয় ইনএনিমেট মেটাৰৰ মাজত প্ৰাণ বিৱৰ্তিত হৈছিল? Darwin has not told us. Darwin's theory is a statement of fact only, without explaining it. But Maharishi has given explanation. What is evolution? He has said evolution is nothing but evolution of consciousness to a greater state, gradually, greater and greater state. So that somehow develops in an originally inanimate and unconscious matter. And it is not inherent in life. It is scientific position, which we boast of tremendously. We, the modern people, boast of tremendously. So it is not inherent in life. Why? According to scientific position, for the plant has it not. But Jagadish Basu's position, Acharya Jagadish Basu's position is a different position. Temei prothom koisil udbidor majoto pran ase. তেওঁলোকৰ মাজত সংবেদনশীলতা আছে। It is not inherent in life, for the plant has it not. Then what it is? What consciousness? What it is? According to scientific position, it's rather a growing flicker. Growing flicker. Eta dhimik dhamak puhor. Flicker mane dhimik dhamak puhor. It's rather a growing flicker that once established, that is to say, somehow developing in an originally inanimate and unconscious matter, or evolving in an animate organization. So once established, last intermittently through sleep and walking. Intermittently means interval loi loi. Interval loi loi. Interval loi loi mane ki? Intermittently mane hol intermitting, or means intermitting or causing at intervals. Roi roi. Orthat tuponir homoyot nai, ako jagroto obostat ase consciousness. It is scientific position. So it is rather a growing flicker that once established, lasts intermittently through sleep and walking, while life lasts. Jetaleke jibon thakibo and disappears with the dissolution of life. But India does not agree with this fact. Even after death, consciousness exists, because consciousness is eternal. Consciousness is a reality inherent in existence. Consciousness, a fundamental thing in existence, not dependent on the reactions of personality. And disappears with the dissolution of life. And therefore, the ordinary mind identifies consciousness with what? With human walking consciousness. As if human walking consciousness, that is to say, jito amar jagroto chetona, superficial consciousness, jagroto chetona tu jeniba amar ekmatro chetonar bhumi, ekmatro chetona. Tar bahire chetona aru kotu pua najay. Possibly shared by the animal, though that is not certain. Kisu bigyaniye koy je hoyto possibly shared by animal consciousness. Consciousness pokur majot ase, but it is obscured. It is unmanifest. Tar majoto hoyto kisuman highly evolved animal or majot apuni consciousness or kisu, because consciousness has to be involved. Karon chetona thakiboi lagibo. Nothing can exist without consciousness, either in a state of involution or in a state of manifest, in a manifest state. Because possibly shared by the animal, though that is not certain, for many refuse consciousness to the animal. This is the ordinary position, ordinary view of consciousness. And this ordinary view is the view of physical science. Physical science means the position of physics. Position of physics. Because science has not so far undertaken any true research to know what is consciousness, because consciousness does not bother them. It is not part of their agenda. But in spirituality, it is the fundamental thing to be experienced, to be understood, because without consciousness, we do not simply exist. We are nothing but consciousness. Without consciousness, my body has no value. It is because consciousness I am existing. I am consciousness. I am a consciousness. I am a manifestation of consciousness only. Body is just the adhara. Body is just the base. Body is base. But consciousness does not depend on personality, does not depend on consciousness. So this is the another aspect. So ordinary view, that is to say view of physical science, the consciousness cannot, the condition, elements of condition of consciousness cannot be classified like the elements of matter. Then we discussed the consciousness not a phenomenon dependent on the reactions of personality. Then the consciousness elements of a condition of consciousness cannot be classified like the elements of matter. Then the ordinary view of consciousness. Ordinary view of consciousness. Now let us take up the concept universal consciousness. Universal consciousness. Universal consciousness. Universal consciousness. What is this? So at this stage, it will be sufficient for us that as the individual has a consciousness of his own, as I have a consciousness of my own, so too there is a universal consciousness, a cosmic being, a universal mind, a universal life, a universal physical consciousness. You will ask what is the proof? Because we all are possessing scientific mind. Without experiencing personally, without testing personally, we have a great faith on scientists. And we tend to believe many things told by scientists because we have a great faith on them. But all, even scientific truths are modified time to time. Scientific, in the history of science, the concept of one scientist has been modified number of times. Still, we do not have disregard. But whenever our rishis will tell something, immediately we ask for proof. What is proof? What is the proof? So Maharishi is aware of this mentality of modern Indian mind. So please wait. So first thing, that as the individual has a consciousness of his own, so too there is a universal consciousness, a cosmic being, a universal mind, a universal life, a universal physical consciousness. Then Maharishi says, yes, we are unaware of it. We do not know it. We do not know it. Rather, it should be said, it should be explained, or it should be stated as we are unaware of it. Because consciousness is awareness. We are unaware of it, that there is a universal consciousness. কিন্তু মই আপোনালোকক এটা প্ৰশ্ন সুধিছো, আজি যদি আমেৰিকাত 1 লাখ মানুহক যদি তাৰ চৰকাৰে নিখংখভাৱে যদি গুলি কৰে, আপুনি জানো অলপ ফিল নকৰিব, দুখ নাপাব? কিয় দুখ পায় আপুনি? Apuni individual consciousness. If there is no universal consciousness, and if I am not part of universal consciousness, why we feel? So there has to be a connection between all the consciousness, all the individual consciousness. There must have a connection between. So, but we are still unaware of it. Then you will ask why we are unaware of it. Maharishi has given that answer also in a single sentence. He said, because we are sata. because we are shut up. আমি আবদ্ধ হৈ আছো ক'ত? In our outer physical selves. So what is the outer physical selves? We are shut up in our mind. We are shut up in our body. We are shut up in our prana, that is to say, vital. It is Maharishi's decision that why we are, yes, he admits that we are unaware of it. And why we are unaware of it? Because we are shut up. Because we are shut up in our outer physical selves. তেনেহ'লে আপুনি ক'ব যে outer physical self-ৰ বাহিৰে আৰু আমাৰ কি আছে? Yes, there are lots of parts, lots of psychological. We are composed of lots of psychological parts, which will be taken up. Then you will ask me how I can experience that universal consciousness. You have to take help of your own laboratory. You have to explore. You have to start doing research through the laboratory of your own, which is absolutely personal to you. So, by the inner awakening. So, this is to be experienced individually. Because I will not believe in others' experience. And subjective findings cannot be put objectively. So we have to undertake. Exploration have to be undertaken individually. So answer is how we can be aware of universal consciousness by the inner awakening. By the inner awakening. Not only inner awakening, by the opening above. Opening above. But right now we are imprisoned in the perilous prison cell of our external selves. So there is no adventure of my consciousness above. There is no adventure of consciousness within me also. So there is no inner awakening. There is no opening of consciousness above. So we are shut up in our external self, and that is why we are unaware of the universal consciousness. But then Maharishi says, Sri Aurobindo says, we become aware. We became aware of this cosmic consciousness. Universal consciousness, you can say also cosmic consciousness. Vishwa Cetana. Only India knows. Only India knows about all these things. Cosmic consciousness, Vishwa Cetana, universal consciousness. So by the inner awakening and the opening above, we become aware of this cosmic consciousness, or you may call cosmic nature and cosmic self and its movement. You will be able to experience personally. The condition is you have to undertake an adventure of inward, adventure of consciousness. You have to move inward, also opening above. And is it possible? Is it possible? Is it means inner awakening and opening above? Maharishi says, yes. Yes. Our consciousness can wider. Our consciousness can wider and become one with it. Individual consciousness can be united with the universal consciousness. That is the fundamental aim of our yogic science. Union. Yoga means to unite, not therapeutic science, not a physical discipline to keep our health in a good position. Though these are byproduct. Because when asanas and pranayamas are used for therapeutic purpose, then it is not called yoga. Then it is called Ayurveda. Then it is called therapeutic science. There are other yogas also. Gyan yoga, bhakti yoga, karma yoga. There are lots of yogas. So our consciousness can wider and become one with it. the forces of universalness are always working on us, but we are unaware of it. Without our knowing how they act, we do not know. But universalness is always working on us. That is why we are get affected. We are get affected. If my individual consciousness has no relation, or if my individual consciousness যদি universal consciousness, or if it were not a part of universal consciousness, আমি universal happening এ why affects me. So the forces of universalness are always working on us without knowing how they act, or being able to get any general control over their action on us. So then how we can know its movement? It means the movement of universalness are working on us by becoming conscious of the universal. And how we will be able to be becoming conscious of universal consciousness? By the inner awakening and opening above. Why we are not at present, why we are unaware of it? Because at present we are shut up in our outer physical self. In other words, it can be said, in a perilous prison cell. We are caught up, we are shut up. So by becoming conscious of the universal, we are able to detect this working and control it. Even then, we shall be able to control the working of universalness on us. Not only detecting, but controlling. You will then possess controlling power too. So, points to be noted: there is a universal consciousness, a cosmic being, a universal mind, a universal life, a universal physical consciousness are like your individual consciousness. But we are unaware of it. Why we are unaware of it? For we are stuck up in our outer physical selves. How we can be aware of it? By the inner awakening and the opening above. There is a various well-developed discipline in India. How inner awakening takes place, how opening of consciousness above takes place. What you need, you do not require intellect. You do not need. There is no need of intellect. No need of intellect. Only three things are required. One is aspiration, but aspiration backed by sincerity, honesty, and intensity. Number two, an effort to reject our lower nature, because in us there is a higher nature, there is a lower nature. And what is lower nature? You all have an idea what could be those lower nature. So you should try to reject first your lower nature, but afterwards you should try to transform your lower nature into higher nature. But at first controlling, then rejecting, then transforming. And third, you cannot do all these things with your own will alone. You have to collaborate. You have to take tuition, because we are partial consciousness. We have to collaborate with the supreme consciousness, with the Shakti of the supreme consciousness. So that is to say, we have to surrender to the Divine Mother. Then inner awakening will be taking place. Then there will be adventure of consciousness. So by the inner awakening and the opening above, we become aware of it. Our consciousness can wider and become one with it. forces of universal nature are always working on us without our knowing how they are acting. By becoming conscious of the universal consciousness, we are able to detect this working and control it. But what is cosmic consciousness? What would be the parinam? What would be the consequence of cosmic consciousness? In a very strictly speaking, or in a very specific manner, when you will be enlarging your individual consciousness into cosmic consciousness, when you will be growing into larger being, when you will be growing into cosmic consciousness, then you will see your own soul in me. You will see your soul in me, and vice versa, and my soul in you. When I will grow into larger being, when I will grow into cosmic consciousness, I will see my own soul in your soul, in you. And I will see your soul in me. We are all interconnected. Right now, we are a portion eternal of this superconscient. We are to grow into that consciousness. So this is for today. Thank you and namaskar to all. If you want to interact, we can interact for a few minutes. Now it can be open for discussion. Probably you can unmute and interact if you want to. Namaskar. Namaskar. কিবা যদি খুদিব লগা আছে খুদিব পাৰে আপোনালোকে আনমিউট কৰি ল'ব পাৰে আৰু আনমিউট কৰি কিবা যদি খুদিব বিচাৰে হয়
মানে কনসিয়াসনেসৰ মানে সাইন্টিফিক ভিউটো অকমান
সাইন্টিফিক ভিউটো
মানে অলপ মানে ক'ব পাৰি মানে ক'ব লাগিছিল কেনেকুৱা
এইটোৱেটো সাইন্টিফিক ভিউ সাইন্সে নাজানে কৈছে এটা নিজে নিজে তেওঁলোকে দেখিছে আনকনসিয়াস ওয়ার্ল্ডত কনসিয়াসনেস ইভলভ হৈছে আৰু বিশেষকৈ যিবিলাক এনিমেট প্ৰাণী তাৰ মাজত ইভলভ হৈছে আৰু তেওঁলোক এইটোৱেই ওয়েস্টাৰ্ণ ভিউ অফ ম্যান তেওঁলোকে কনসিয়াসনেস ক'ৰ পৰা ইভলভ হৈছে কিয় ইভলভ হৈছে এই কনসিয়াসনেসৰ হোৱাট ইজ ইট ডেষ্টিনি সেইবোৰ তেওঁলোকে সাধাৰণতে দে আৰ নট বৰ্ডাৰ্ড এবাউট আৰু তেওঁলোকে দেখিছে এই চেতনা যদি কৈছে যে কিছুমানে কৈছে প্ৰাণীৰ মাজত এনিমেলৰ মাজত আছে কিছুমানে কৈছে নাই কিন্তু তেওঁলোকে দেখিছে যে কনসিয়াসনেসৰ অলপ মিনিং তেওঁলোকে মানুহৰ মাজত দেখা পাইছে গতিকে দে আৰ কনসাৰ্ন এবাউট হিউম্যানিটি কিন্তু হোৱাট ইজ দিস কনসিয়াসনেস এইবিলাক বিষয়ে তেওঁলোকে ৰিগাৰ্ডিং কনসিয়াসনেসৰ ওপৰত ইন্ডিভিজুৱেল লেভেলত কৰিছে মই এটো নকওঁ পৃথিৱীৰ সকলো প্ৰান্তৰ মানুহে ইন্ডিভিজুৱেল লেভেলত আৰু কাৰণ কিয় লাষ্ট 200 ইয়াৰ্ছত 300 ইয়াৰ্ছত বহুত মডাৰ্ণ মানুহ ইভেন সাইকোলজিস্ট লাইক জুং মেছলো কামিং নিয়াৰাৰ টু ইণ্ডিয়ান সাইকোলজি গতিকে মূলত মই যিখিনি ক'লো এতিয়া যে সাইন্টিফিক ভিউ যিখিনি মই কৈছিলো আকৌ লেট মি ৰিকেপ দেন কৈছে ফৰ ফিজিক্যাল সায়েন্স কনসিয়াসনেস ইজ এ টেম্পোৰাৰী ফেনোমেনন in an unconscious world but we consider there is a consciousness behind this world and we do not consider consciousness as a temporary phenomenon for Indian psychology consciousness is a fundamental thing consciousness is a reality inherent in existence consciousness is eternally existing and then the view, scientific view, something evolved in an animate organization. Animate organization means ami, jibilak prani, pran ase jar majot, animate organization. And can evolve that somehow develops. Somehow develops. They do not know how it is being developed, how it is being rather evolved, not developed. So that somehow develops in an originally inanimate and unconscious matter. কাৰণ মেটাৰৰ পৰাই সেইবোৰ ইভলভ হৈছে কিন্তু আমাৰ বেদান্তই তাৰ এটা ব্যাখ্যা দিছে যে মেটাৰৰ মাজত প্ৰাণ আছিল প্ৰাণৰ মাজত মন আছিল মন থাকা বাবেহে মনৰ বিবৰ্তন হৈছে প্ৰাণ থাকা বাবেহে বিবৰ্তন হৈছে আৰু সাইন্টিফিক ভিউ এটা হল ইট ইজ ৰাডাৰ এ গ্ৰোইং ফ্লিকাৰ এটা ধিমিক ধামাক পোহৰৰ দৰে গ্ৰোইং ফ্লিকাৰ ওয়ান্স এস্টাবলিশড যদি এবাৰ এনিমেট অৰ্গেনাইজেশ্যনত এস্টাবলিশ হৈছে লাষ্ট ইন্টাৰমিটেন্টলি থ্ৰু স্লিপ এণ্ড ৱাকিং while life lasts যেতিয়ালৈকে জীৱন থাকিব disappears with the dissolution of life কিন্তু ইয়াত কৈছে individual consciousnessৰ বাহিৰত there is a universal consciousness এটা consciousness is eternally existing আৰু গতিকে আমি ordinary view হল consciousnessৰ কি identifying consciousness with mind but mind is definitely an aspect of consciousness but it is not the only aspect of consciousness আমি যেতিয়া আৰু কনসিয়াসনেসৰ বিষয়ে এই আলোচনা কিটা মাজত অলমান কোনোবাই এটেন্ড নকৰিলে তেওঁৰ বাবে পৰৱৰ্তীটোত অলপ বুজা দিগদাৰ হ'ব কাৰণ আই এম সিস্টেমেটিক্যালি টেকিং আপ কাৰণ এটাৰ লগত এটা লিংক আছে কাৰণ বস্তুবোৰ ইমান these are deeper as the deeper matters these are not something like মানে political component political sociological economical component these are something deeper knowledge আমি যে ভাৰতৰ জ্ঞান বুলি কওঁ these are deeper knowledge হ'ব
ঠিক আছে
হয় থ্যাংক ইউ
ধন্যবাদ
আৰু কোনোবাই কিবা জানিব
স্যার নমস্কাৰ
নমস্কাৰ
স্যার প্ৰথমতে যে ৰেফাৰেন্স বুকখন দিছিলে নামটো
an autobiography by a yogi an autobiography by a yogi এই বুলিয়েই গুগলত আমি সার্চ কৰিলে পাম পৰমহংস যোগানন্দ অসমীয়াও পোৱা যায় বাংলাও পোৱা যায় অসমীয়া হয়তো আমাজনত পোৱা যাব নাই নাজানো অঞ্জন শৰ্মা ভবানী প্ৰেছৰ লগত যোগাযোগ কৰিলে তেওঁ অসমীয়া কৰিছিল মই জানো কিতাপখন বাংলাও পোৱা যায় হিন্দীও পোৱা যায় ইংৰাজীও পোৱা যায় অৰিজিনালি ৰিটেন ইন ইংলিছ
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার
মই ঠিক কিতাপখনৰ দুই এটা কাহিনী ক'ব পাৰিলোহেঁতেন মই আজি আচলতে কিতাপখন মই মোৰ মানে পঢ়াৰ ৰুমত মই বিচাৰি পোৱা নাই ক'ত থৈছো অলপমান কথাবোৰ পাহৰাৰ কাৰণে কোৱা নাই আপোনালোকে নিজে পঢ়ি ল'ব পাৰিব so perhaps we can conclude now
Okay, as we have come to an end of today's session, if I can at all summarize the lecture that Sir has presented today, I think what I have understood from today's session is that Indian knowledge system and science have parallelly talked about consciousness, but however, there is an elementary difference that is consciousness. The Indian knowledge system have made a study or have explained consciousness to its totality where it have explained the process of inner awakening and opening above or so to say the universal awakening whereas the science have somewhere stopped and not talked beyond a point.
yes
So you have rightly mentioned, sir, as I was going through your lecture, I could feel that or also understand how we, as an individual, witness consciousness in our everyday life. Every day we follow what is happening, and every day we go through that uh, experience, which you have talked, obviously. It is a personal exploration and not intellectual knowledge, which can be attained only through books. It is a power of awareness which exists in form of dynamic and creative energy and which is also subjective. So I think that was a very extensive and insightful thing, because we all undergo this kind of experience, but however I think we fail to understand exactly what we are undergoing. So thank you, sir, for explaining that to us.
Thank you.
With this, we come to an end. Namaskar, good night, and I wish you all a happy Deepavali ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, and namaskar, and happy Deepavali, and good night to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Namaskar.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Deepavali.
Happy Deepavali.